courtyard garden. Missions took their garden design from Spanish tradition, which itself borrowed from Arabic, Moorish, and Roman architectural tradition. An ideal Spanish garden incorporated a walled courtyard with a central fountain that promoted shade, fragrance, and color. These gardens featured mostly plants imported from Europe and brought to the New World by the Padres. They were each valuable in their own way for cultural, religious, or symbolic importance, medicinal or food value, shade, or aesthetics. The tranquility of these natural spaces brought the Spanish and indigenous communities together to savor common cultural values, beauty, and utility. The courtyard garden at Tumacacori was built in 1939 as part of the Visitor Center's New Deal-era construction. Its design, like that of the adjacent Visitor Center, was inspired by other missions in the Pimeria Alta. Several agencies were involved, but the original plantings were carried out by 16 young men employed by the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. 3 native mesquite trees were left in place and continue to grow in the garden. The olive, ornamental pomegranate, and monk's pepper trees survive to this day. When the original apricot tree had to be removed, a seed from that tree provided its replacement. Community Plaza. At its peak of activity, this bustling community space served as a backdrop to the lives of nearly 200 mission residents. People walked from here to attend church services, engage in work in the convento, or go to the fields, gardens, and orchards between the plaza and the river. The long, low mound to the left of the sidewalk protects what remains of adobe residences connected in a line running north to south. Take a moment to imagine the mission community as it once was, the sounds of animals, children running and playing in the plaza, oxen and carts coming and going. Here is a village at work. Many different languages could be heard in the plaza. Some priests came from Spain, but others from Austria, Switzerland, Italy, or Bavaria. The O'odham had many dialects. The Ueme, now referred to as the Yaqui, spoke a totally separate language. The Nde, now called the Apache, shared linguistic roots with the Navajo. The proximity of neighbors in the mission core differs from traditional O'odham villages. There, family households might be generally clustered together, but did not share walls, enclosed spaces, or other facilities. The density of the closely packed mission community likely contributed to the spread of European diseases, such as measles, smallpox, and typhus. Muro ki. The O'odham word for house is ki. Muro is the spiky plant known in Spanish and English as ocotillo. Before the arrival of adobe construction from Spain, the O'odham built rounded homes using mud applied over a wood and brush framework. When rain washed away some of the mud, a new coating was always close at hand. Over time, the O'odham adopted the square rooms favored by the Spanish. The home would also include a wa'ato, or mesquite ramada, and a brush enclosure for cooking. While the inside of the key provided shelter on cold nights, many activities in the home took place under or around the wa'ato. Although many mission residents lived in the Spanish-style adobe rooms around the plaza in front of the church, some may have continued to live in traditional homes. The O'odham still build and use structures like this, made of mesquite timbers, ocotillo sticks, saguaro ribs, and mud. This one was built in 1997 by O'odham from the San Javier community using traditional hand tools. When completed, it was dedicated by them to San Francisco Javier, Father Kino's patron saint. Only portions of the original three-sided convento complex remain today, the two-story storeroom at the northwest corner, and this fragment. Just ahead of you was the arched entrance into the convento courtyard, graced by a small dome above. The priest also lived in this wing of the complex. Originally, Tumacacori was only a visita, a visiting station for Catholic missionaries. It wasn't until 1768 that Tumacacori became a cabecera, a mission that housed a resident priest. This likely caused significant disturbance for the O'odham of Tumacacori. With only occasional visits from the priest, they could openly continue their traditional religious and social practices. Now, under the watchful eye of a resident priest, they had to conceal those practices in order to model Spanish and Catholic values. This structure continued to serve the Tumacacori community long after the mission era. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, this remaining section of the convento served as a residence, a school, and later housed the museum of the fledgling Tumacacori National Monument. A herringbone pattern floor currently duplicates and protects the original floor beneath one room. More than any other structure here, it has seen many preservation techniques tried to protect it. Storeroom. The storeroom's two-story structure was the tallest part of the convento complex. Its wide staircase led to an upper level, which was supported by heavy pine beams hauled from the heights of the Santa Rita Mountains. The large beams were, in turn, supported by two thick adobe piers. On the right side of the doorway are depressions where large clay jars filled with seed and grain were stored for the next season's crops. The storeroom's surpluses and deficits were the measure of success or failure of a mission. A well-stocked storeroom allowed the purchase of clothing or other resources. Empty shelves signaled stress. The storeroom also embodied the community's new European-style corporate hierarchy and contrasted with the O'odham's consensus-based government. Harvested food would be collected here and then distributed on a weekly basis. However, the gatekeeper to the storeroom could withhold access, making food contingent on following the mission's rules. Spanish maestras de obra used architectural traditions from across the globe. The capitals at the tops of the columns are Egyptian in style. The plastered arch design over the front door is Roman. The pointed tops on the statue niches on the second level come from the Moorish influence of the Middle East and Northern Africa. Even the bell tower niche scallop shell motif, a nod to Spain's patron saint, has Roman origins. Spain's influences made their way to Tumacacori in color as well. The columns on the front of the church were painted red, the capitals yellow with black markings. Statues stood against a blue background in their niches. The plaster of the doorway was carved and painted to resemble blocks of orange marble. You can still see original paint in the doorway and under the cornice below the window. The monumental building, with its bright color scheme and decorative elements, would have been unlike anything in O'odham tradition. Previously, natural features like springs and mountains provided a community's identity and place name. But after the O'odham labored for more than 20 years to build this new face for their village, it became a landscape feature itself and a symbol for Tumacacori's complex story. Step through the arched entryway and into the remains of an impressive nave, the central hall of the church. In this room, indigenous people and Spanish settlers prayed and celebrated the Mass each day. There were no pews. People knelt or stood during services. Along the walls are 4 side altars where devotional candles might be placed. In the walls above are niches where ornate statues of saints once stood. Along the interior walls, weathering has exposed the sun-dried adobe bricks made by mission residents. The once brightly painted walls were decorated by the steady hands of artisans, both indigenous and Spanish. With the rising sun, families and individuals living in the mission would make their way to the nave to gather and start the day. It is likely that men and women were separated by sex, as was the colonial manner. Here, indigenous people learned and practiced new religious traditions in new languages. They adopted new deities and established a new worldview under the direction of the padres. In this space there were tears, both happy and sad. There was loss, celebration, learning, and change. Shortly after the residents left in 1848, the roof timbers were taken by local settlers for construction elsewhere. For the next 20 years, the nave was exposed and heavily damaged by weather. Looters, seeking Jesuit treasure that never existed, dug holes in the walls and floors. Sacristy. The sacristy served as the priest's office. It housed the holy vestments and other objects for Mass. A priest would spend many hours working by candlelight in this room, documenting the important events of the day, such as baptisms, marriages, and deaths. The mission records are a treasure trove of information, but require some skill to interpret. They were handwritten with quill pen in now antique Spanish. Personal details, especially from the perspective of women, O'odham, Yueme, and Nde community members, are difficult to extract. After the mission residents left Tumacacori for the last time in 1848, the church became a refuge and the sacristy its primary lodging. The protection of its thick walls offered welcome shelter for gold seekers on their way to California and for Mexican and U.S. soldiers and cowboys. These tired travelers recorded their stays not in mission record books, but on the walls. The darkened ceiling and many names are proof of the numerous fires made, dinners cooked, and stories told in this space.